Good afternoon. This is David Unsworth, host of the PanAm Post English podcast. Lula da Silva, arguably the most important figure in Brazilian politics since the nation's return to democracy in 1985, was faced with a dual challenge: getting the Brazilian economy on solid economic footing, while also tackling Brazil's high levels of poverty and extreme poverty. To that end, he spearheaded the relatively popular Bolsa Familia program, which provides modest payments, known as conditional cash transfers, to families in need. Families in greatest need and with more children receive the highest payments. In total, however, the government states that the payments are not enough to replace an income, generally amounting to a third of a minimum wage. The program has been credited with improvements in poverty reduction, education, and health care. But does the Bolsa Familia program provide opportunities or foster a culture of dependency? And with the federal government in crisis mode, will the government pare back the program or try to expand it in the future? The Bolsa Familia program has opponents both on the left and the right, within the academic community as well. On the right, there are those who see it as creating a disincentive to work, and on the left, there are those who view it as a means to create a permanent underclass while leaving Brazil's socioeconomic structure and great levels of inequality in place. If you look at the nation, the world's 180, 190 odd nations, you find the highest levels of inequality here in South America, as well as sub-Saharan Africa. Brazil and Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia are very, very high on that list among the most unequal countries in the world. Brazil's current minimum wage is 880 reais, which is about $240 a month. So we are talking here about a nation where if you are working a minimum wage job in a typical 30-day month, you are pulling in $8 a month. And that sounds extremely low. Of course, obviously, the cost of living in Brazil is much lower than, say, Western Europe or the United States. But yes, living on a minimum wage in Brazil is going to be very tight. These are mostly people who are living in rural poverty or living in a favela type area in a city like Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasilia. The program has been met with accolades, really, across the political spectrum and throughout the world. It's actually been the basis for many other programs, these so-called conditioned cash transfers. And what is unique about this program, or what was kind of revolutionary about this program, is that the payments are tied to parents taking care of their children, school attendance and vaccination, and doctor's visits specifically. In order to be eligible for the payments, children under 15 must attend 85% of classes in a typical semester year, and children aged 16 and 17 must attend 75% of classes. So it does seem to still be rather generous. If you're in finishing high school, you can miss a quarter of your classes and your family will still get the benefits. The reason for those rather generous allowances for school truancy is that older children are expected to try to learn something, such as a trade or some kind of way to make a living, even if it's something as simple as a popcorn cart. And in rural communities, it's very customary that children participate in the harvest. So their parents may take them out of school for a couple of weeks to do that, and there's not a whole lot that the federal government can do about that. This is what they're trying to do. So what is the scope of this program now? It's become something of the third rail in Brazilian politics. In the United States, we talk about the third rail being Social Security. It's supposedly a very popular program. No one's talking about touching it. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a liberal, a conservative, leave Social Security alone. The Bolsa Familia program remains rather resiliently popular, and it is a huge program. 50 million Brazilians, that's about a quarter of the country, are now getting these cash transfers. Bolsa Familia was the unification or the combination of a program of three separate programs that involve these cash transfer schemes. Civil servant Luis Enrique Paiva argues that the Bolsa Familia program was a necessary counterpart to social insurance programs that already existed that benefited the sick, the elderly, and the unemployed. But those were programs for people that had been in the workforce and that had been contributing to these programs, similar to Social Security in the United States. Fundamentally, the question here is there a right to education and health care? Should there be? So, on the one hand here, for a libertarian such as myself who is going to suggest that these types of social welfare programs have unintended consequences that hurt the economy, hurt the family, hurt the community. On the one hand, the average family here is getting about 200 reais. We're talking $60, $70. It's not a program that's designed to replace their income or even one person's minimum wage income. It's a program that is specifically designed to bring them just over the poverty line. Clearly, the benefits that we're talking about here in Brazil are not particularly generous. The benefits are far more generous in the United States or Canada or Western Europe. And, you know, we're talking about a country now, though, that is faced with a dire economic situation. Between 2015 and 2016, the GDP here has decreased by 8%. And the federal government is currently running a fiscal deficit of 9% of GDP. I mean, that is atrocious. I mean, to put this in comparative terms, I mean, something like this would be utterly devastating for any economy. And you can see the results of this. I mean, I've been in Rio de Janeiro state, in Bahia state this week. You can see that people here are hurting, and homeless rates are up. And part of the problem that a libertarian such as myself is going to have here with a program like this is that it, in a certain sense, provides a disincentive to find work, and it puts the wrong kind of incentives in place. It kind of teaches people the lesson that I am not responsible for taking care of myself, Lula da Silva or Michel Temerez, and I have come to rely on these 200 reais a month. Well, I'm certainly not in favor of hunger. I don't want anyone in Brazil or anyone else to go to bed hungry at night. But these kinds of programs that just rob Peter to pay Paul, are they structurally efficient? Are they structurally productive? And the other great problem I have with this, and I am no fan of the Workers' Party, and I am no fan of Dilma Rousseff and Lula da Silva, as anyone who's listened to my podcast knows. This has really emerged as a political tool, as a vote-buying tool. Now, they're traditionally, you know, if you read up about vote buying and the vote buying problem in Brazil, for example, in states like Maranhão, in the north of the country, it is traditional that families seek out local political bosses, and they receive cash payments in return for voting a certain way in federal elections. That's obviously a serious problem. Now, the way this program is distributed is interesting. The program involves debit cards that are mailed out to heads of households, and these heads of households are almost always women. And then they are able to withdraw this money from one of the nation's largest banks, which is called Caixa Econômica Federal. It's actually Brazil's second largest bank. So government surveys that have been done by a body called IPEA claim that the money is spent generally on food, school supplies, clothing, and shoes, in that order. Now, I understand the optics of opposing a program like this. I mean, we're not talking about very much money on a per-family basis, and it goes to struggling mothers, many of whom are single heads of household, and they're not spending it on extravagances or luxuries or booze or drugs. They're spending this money on practical things to use to take care of their children. Nonetheless, we have another study here done by IPEA that has concluded that the labor force participation rate between those aged 15 and 24 has declined significantly. Now you might say, well, a 15-year-old kid or 16-year-old kid shouldn't be working anyway. I agree with that. A 15 and 16-year-old kid should be in school, but perhaps they should be having a part-time job on the weekends or after school. I did. I had part-time jobs starting at 16 and after school hours. But the problem with a program like this, and it's what Bill Clinton and the Republican Congress addressed in 1994 and ultimately led to welfare reform, which was considered to be successful. The problem with this is that it doesn't seem to create a path for personal responsibility and individual entrepreneurship. It just seems like, and there's really no intent on the part of the government to get people out of this program. It actually seems now that what it really has become is a way for the Partido Trabalhadores, the Brazilian Workers' Party, to make a quarter of Brazil's population dependent upon them for a monthly cash handout. And that raises serious problems. Brazil does not have a magical money tree in Brasilia. This money is coming from somewhere. It's taking money from one set of people and giving it to another set of people. You can argue that the results are good. Paul Wolfowitz, who was a Bush administration figure and former head of the World Bank, has praised this program, says it's efficient, says it's working. But this mentality of dependence, it's just, and someone like Kim Kataguiri of the Movimento Livre do Brasil, he's kind of a leading libertarian voice here based out of Sao Paulo, and he's said publicly that, it's ridiculous to suggest that just by giving people money each month and saying, wow, you're now out of poverty, that's some kind of great accomplishment or great achievement. And I have to say, I'm pretty inclined to agree with him on that point. And another thing that's extremely troubling about this is that particularly in some of these rural areas, and studies have shown that the Bolsa Familia program is actually far more prevalent in rural areas than in urban areas. In some of these rural areas where it's very hard to find a minimum wage job, even if it's only 880 reales, that it provides incentives for very poor families to have children. I've read here cases in Brazil's north and northeast where women have said, well, I can earn more through the Bolsa Familia program than I can through going out and getting a job. And I think regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, I think we can all agree that incentivizing the poorest people to have children is about the worst thing that you could possibly do. Then again, if they already have children, you can argue that, well, these children need food, clothing, education, school supplies, and so forth, and a little extra money for them every month for the mothers, for the heads of households. How can you possibly argue against that? But the bottom line here is that Brazil does not have any more money. Brazil does not have any more money to spend. The state of affairs in Brazil is in shambles. As I've written in an article this week, the decision to host the Olympic Games will go down as one of the worst in history. When you have a quarter of your population living in poverty, and poverty that's far more abject than you'd find in Western Europe and the United States, how does it benefit them to host a 2-week event with water polo and short tracks, speed cycling, and gymnastics and handball? The government now has these fancy facilities and stadiums and so forth in far-flung places on their hands, and how does that benefit people living in favelas in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro? Well, I mean, it certainly doesn't. And another issue here, as I was talking about earlier with this rural and urban divide, it smacks of a political patronage program. For example, the greatest concentrations of poverty in the country are in favelas in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. But studies have shown that only 10% of the families in these two cities are participating in the Bolsa Familia program. So why is it that people in rural parts of the north and the northeast of Brazil, the participation rates are far, far, far higher? There's also claims that there is discrimination in administration of the program. For example, there's an article here, I believe it's in The Guardian, that discusses people saying that they do not understand how the benefits are allocated, that sometimes it doesn't really make sense because one family's getting more than another when the first family has fewer children or has even is in a better economic situation than the second family. It seems like even with the system designed to be decentralized and not allow for political interference, it seems like political interference is creeping in, and there are cases of in some poor states people lining up outside the offices that administer these programs and complaining, why were my benefits cut, why am I not getting benefits, and so forth. But ultimately here, I can live with the Bolsa Familia program. I'm not the biggest fan, as a strong opponent of, as a firm believer that really individuals should be taking care of themselves if they can. But I can live with Bolsa Familia. The problem is, though, and I think even people on the left are going to agree with this, certainly conservatives and libertarians will, what happens in 10 years? Right now you have a quarter of Brazil getting a Bolsa Familia payment. Well, in 10 years, are they still going to be getting a Bolsa Familia payment, and are they going to be expecting that to go up 10% every year? I mean, with Brazil's crazy, crazy rates of inflation, I mean, between 2015 and 2016, the minimum wage went up 11.6%. I mean, if and inflation still is a serious problem in Brazil, and costs of living are high and wages are low, what steps can be taken by the next government, whether it's a left-wing government or right-wing government, to ensure that something like a Bolsa Familia is a hand up, not a handout? How are people going to participate in the economy, participate in the formal economy, pay into Social Security and healthcare and so forth, and not just expect regular handout from the government at the end of every month? This has been David Unsworth with the PanAm Post English podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel.